The summer fair in Pine Valley was always the highlight of the year, drawing crowds from neighboring towns with its vibrant carnival rides, tempting food stalls, and lively atmosphere. This year, however, would be remembered differently, especially by a group of overconfident bikers who learned a valuable lesson about judging books by their covers. Among the fairgoers was a man in his early 30s, dressed in simple jeans and a plain white t-shirt. He stood quietly in line at a cotton candy stand, his gentle demeanor and soft-spoken nature catching the attention of three burly bikers who had been causing minor disturbances throughout the afternoon. The quiet man's presence seemed to irritate them, perhaps because his calmness stood in stark contrast to their boisterous behavior. The leader of the bikers, a tall figure with a leather vest covered in patches, nudged his companions and pointed at the quiet man. "Look at this guy," he sneered loud enough for nearby visitors to hear. "Probably scared of his own shadow." The other two bikers chuckled, their heavy boots scraping against the gravel as they moved closer to their target. What the bikers didn't know was that the quiet man was Chen Wei, though he preferred to go by Rick in the States. He had spent the last 15 years training in various martial arts disciplines across Asia, eventually becoming a 3-time world champion in mixed martial arts. However, he had stepped away from the spotlight to open a small dojo where he taught children self-defense and discipline. The cotton candy vendor, an elderly woman who had worked the fair for decades, noticed the tension building. She tried to hurry Rick's order, her weathered hands working quickly to wrap the pink fluff around a paper cone. But before she could hand it to him, the leader of the bikers deliberately bumped into Rick, causing him to stumble slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry," the biker said with exaggerated politeness, earning more laughs from his friends. "Didn't see you there, little man." The crowd around them began to thin out, parents pulling their children away from what they assumed would be trouble. Rick simply straightened himself and offered a small smile, which seemed to infuriate the bikers even more. The second biker, sporting a thick beard and numerous tattoos, stepped forward. "What's so funny, buddy? You think something's amusing?" He poked Rick's chest with a thick finger, leaving a small grease stain on the white fabric. Rick glanced down at the mark, then back up at the biker, his expression remaining remarkably calm. "I don't want any trouble," Rick said softly, his slight accent barely noticeable. "I'm just here to enjoy the fair with my students." He gestured toward a group of young kids watching nervously from a nearby bench, their own cotton candy forgotten in their hands. The sight of the children only seemed to embolden the bikers further. The third biker, the shortest but most muscular of the group, circled around behind Rick. "Oh, you're a teacher? What do you teach, how to be a pushover?" He shoved Rick from behind, expecting him to stumble forward into his companions. Instead, Rick smoothly sidestepped the push, maintaining his balance with the grace of a practiced martial artist. This simple movement caught the bikers off guard. The leader's eyes narrowed as he noticed Rick's perfect stance, the way his feet had automatically shifted to maintain balance. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The crowd that had backed away now stood still, sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. Rick's students watched with a mixture of concern and excitement. They had seen their teacher in action during classes, but always in controlled, instructional settings. Now they were about to witness why their parents had specifically chosen Rick's dojo over all others in the area. The tension in the air was palpable as the bikers realized they might have made a serious mistake in their choice of target. The fair's cheerful music seemed to fade into the background, and the scent of popcorn and cotton candy mixed with the growing anxiety in the air. The story of what happened next would be told and retold in Pine Valley for years to come, becoming something of a local legend about the quiet man at the summer fair who taught three troublemakers an unforgettable lesson in humility and respect. As the sun began to set over the fairgrounds, casting long shadows across the dusty paths between carnival rides, no one present could have predicted how this confrontation would end. The quiet man's next actions would not only change the bikers' perspective but would also teach everyone present a valuable lesson about courage, restraint, and the true meaning of strength. The fair's security guard, a retired police officer named Pete, had noticed the commotion and was making his way through the crowd. However, before he could intervene, Rick took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that carried unexpected authority despite its gentleness. "I understand you're trying to impress your friends," Rick said, looking directly at the biker leader. "But you're scaring the children and ruining everyone's evening. Why don't we talk about this like adults?" His words, though diplomatic, carried an undertone of confidence that made several onlookers exchange knowing glances. The leader's face reddened, more from embarrassment than anger. He wasn't used to being addressed so calmly by someone he was trying to intimidate. "Look at this guy, trying to be all wise and peaceful," he scoffed, but his voice had lost some of its earlier swagger. His companions shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in atmosphere. From the bench where Rick's student sat, a small voice piped up. "Master Rick can break 3 boards with 1 hit." It was little Tommy, one of his youngest students, unable to contain himself. The other children quickly shushed him, but the words had already caught the biker's attention. The muscular biker at the back let out a forced laugh. "Master Rick? What is this, some kind of kung fu movie?" He moved to grab Rick's shoulder, but what happened next left the entire crowd gasping. Without seeming to move, Rick was suddenly 3 feet away, and the biker was grasping at empty air. "How did you?" The biker stuttered, his confidence visibly shaken. Rick hadn't taken a fighting stance or made any aggressive moves. He had simply moved, with a grace that seemed almost supernatural to the untrained eye. The cotton candy vendor, who had been watching everything unfold, suddenly spoke up. "I know who you are," she said, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "My grandson has your poster in his room. You're the Silent Dragon." The nickname caused a ripple of whispers through the crowd, and several people pulled out their phones to search the name. The biker leader's face went from red to pale as realization dawned. The Silent Dragon? The guy who won that championship in Singapore? His voice had lost all its previous mockery, replaced by a mix of awe and apprehension. Rick smiled modestly. "That was a long time ago. These days, I prefer teaching children how to avoid fights rather than win them." He glanced at his students, who were now beaming with pride. Violence should always be the last resort, not the first choice. The second biker, the one with the thick beard, suddenly removed his leather gloves and extended his hand. "Man, I feel like a complete idiot," he said, genuine remorse in his voice. "My kid actually takes martial arts classes across town. This isn't the example I want to set." Rick accepted the handshake, his grip firm but friendly. "It's never too late to set a better example," he said. "In fact, why don't you bring your child to our dojo sometime? The first lesson is always free." The tension in the air began to dissolve, replaced by an atmosphere of mutual respect. The leader of the bikers, however, was still struggling with his wounded pride. His hands were clenched into fists, and sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought an internal battle. The crowd watched, wondering if he would choose to escalate the situation despite knowing who Rick was. "You think you're better than us because you've got some fancy title?" he growled, taking a step forward. But his heart wasn't in it anymore, and everyone could tell. His own companions were now backing away from him, not wanting to be associated with his continued aggression. Rick's response was to bend down and pick up a piece of paper that had fallen from someone's pocket during the commotion. He handed it to a nearby child, then turned back to the biker leader. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," he said quietly. "That's actually the first lesson I teach my students. True strength isn't about proving yourself superior to others." A little girl tugged at the biker leader's leather vest. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with missing front teeth and pigtails. "My brother takes classes with Master Rick," she said innocently. "He used to get bullied, but now he just walks away. Mom says he's super brave." The biker leader looked down at the little girl, then back at Rick, and something seemed to crack in his tough exterior. His shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time, a look of shame crossed his face. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Security guard Pete had finally made his way through the crowd, but instead of finding a fight, he discovered something unexpected. The atmosphere had shifted from hostile to almost educational, with Rick's students now eagerly explaining to curious onlookers what they learned in his classes. The fair's cheerful music once again filled the air, and the smell of popcorn and cotton candy returned to people's awareness. The sun had dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the scene. But the story wasn't quite over yet. The biker leader still stood there, wrestling with his pride and the choice he needed to make. The next few moments at the Pine Valley Fair would prove to be transformative for everyone present, especially the biker leader who stood frozen in his internal struggle. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, creating an almost theatrical backdrop for what was about to unfold. "I've been watching you all afternoon," Rick said softly, addressing the biker leader. "You've got natural leadership skills. Your friends look up to you. But leadership isn't about intimidation." He paused, letting his words sink in. "It's about inspiring others to be their best selves." The crowd had formed a loose circle around them, but it wasn't the tense barrier of before. Now it was more like a community gathered to witness something important. Parents were holding their children's hands, teenagers had stopped scrolling on their phones, and even the carnival workers had paused to watch. The biker leader's hands unclenched slowly, and something in his stance changed. "I used to be different," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Had a construction company, coached Little League baseball. Then the economy hit hard, lost everything." He looked down at his leather vest, covered in patches that screamed defiance. "Somewhere along the way, I started believing that being tough meant being cruel." Rick nodded understanding. "Life can be a harsh teacher," he said. "But it's never too late to choose a different path." He gestured to his students, who were still watching intently from their bench. "These kids don't just learn how to defend themselves in my dojo. They learn how to build themselves up without tearing others down." The second biker, who had already extended his hand in friendship, stepped forward again. "Hey, boss," he said to his leader, "remember when you helped me fix my bike last winter? Spent 3 days in the cold because you said no brother of yours was going to be stranded." He turned to the crowd. "This man's got a good heart. He just lost his way a bit." The cotton candy vendor, who had been quietly making more pink fluff, spoke up again. "My stand was almost robbed last month," she said. "These bikers scared off the thieves and stayed with me until closing time. Wouldn't even take any money for helping." Her words caused more whispers in the crowd, but this time they were different, murmurs of appreciation rather than fear. The biker leader's tough exterior cracked a little more. "That was nothing," he mumbled, but his face had softened. "Just did what anyone would do." He looked at Rick with new eyes, seeing not a potential victim or a martial arts champion, but someone who might understand. One of Rick's older students, a teenager wearing his white belt with obvious pride, stepped forward. "Before I joined the dojo, I was angry all the time," he said. "Master Rick taught me that the strongest people are the ones who know when not to use their strength." The muscular biker who had tried to grab Rick earlier shuffled his feet. "My kid," he said suddenly. "The one taking martial arts classes across town. He keeps asking me to watch him practice, but I always say I'm too busy. Truth is, I'm ashamed because I never finished anything in my life." Rick's face lit up. "It's never too late to start," he said. "Why don't all of you come to the dojo tomorrow? We're having a father-child class in the morning." He smiled. "No experience necessary, just an open mind and a willing heart." The biker leader looked at his companions, then back at Rick. The internal struggle was visible on his face, pride wrestling with the desire for change. The entire fair seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a vulnerability that no one had heard before. "My son, he lives with his mother now. Haven't seen him in 2 years." He swallowed hard. "Been telling myself it's better this way, that he's better off without me. But watching you with these kids." Rick stepped forward and placed a hand on the biker's shoulder. The gesture was so natural, so free of fear or judgment, that it seemed to break down the last walls of resistance. "Every journey begins with a single step," Rick said. "And the hardest step is often the first one." He pulled out his phone. "Let me give you my number. Sometimes all we need is someone to remind us of who we really are." The sun had almost completely set now, and the fair's lights were twinkling to life. The Ferris wheel cast rotating shadows across the scene, and somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter rang out. The moment felt magical, as if the universe had conspired to bring these unlikely people together for a purpose. The third biker, who had been quietly observing, suddenly chuckled. "You know what's funny?" he said. "We came here looking for trouble, and instead, we found." He struggled to find the right word. "Hope," the cotton candy vendor supplied, handing out free cones to the bikers. "You found hope." The simple truth of her words seemed to touch everyone present. The biker leader reached into his vest and pulled out a worn wallet. From it, he extracted a small photo, crumpled but carefully preserved. "This is my boy," he said, showing it to Rick. "He'd be about 10 now. Used to love martial arts movies." His voice cracked slightly. "Think it's too late to start being the dad he deserves?" Rick studied the photograph in the dim fairground light, a gentle smile spreading across his face. The image showed a younger version of the biker leader, clean-shaven and wearing a baseball coach's uniform, his arm around a small boy who held a martial arts magazine. The resemblance between father and son was striking. "It's never too late," Rick said, carefully handing back the photo. "I have a student who started training with his daughter when he was 55. They now compete in father-daughter tournaments together." He paused, watching as the biker leader carefully tucked the photo away. "The past doesn't define us. Our choices today do." The fair had transformed around them as evening settled in. The carnival lights created a warm glow, and the atmosphere had shifted from tense confrontation to something almost magical. Families who had earlier kept their distance were now gathered closer, drawn into the unfolding story of redemption. The cotton candy vendor, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "My stand is here every Friday night during summer," she said, addressing the biker leader. "Maybe you could bring your son here? Start small, you know." Her weathered face creased with kindness. Sometimes the biggest changes start with cotton candy and conversation. The second biker pulled out his phone, showing a photo of his own child in a martial arts uniform. "My kid's got a tournament next month," he said. "Been making excuses about not going, but..." He looked at his leader, then at Rick. "Maybe it's time we both showed up for our kids." One of Rick's youngest students tugged at the biker leader's leather vest. "My dad wasn't around either," the child said with disarming honesty. "But he came back. Now he comes to all my classes. He says watching me makes him brave." The simple wisdom of children often cuts straight to the heart of matters. The biker leader knelt down to the child's level, his tough exterior completely fallen away. "How?" His voice cracked, and he had to start again. "How did you forgive him?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The child thought for a moment, then shrugged. "He showed up. That's the hard part. The rest just happened." Several parents in the crowd wiped their eyes discreetly, touched by the profound simplicity of the answer. Rick's other students had gathered closer, no longer intimidated by the bikers. One of them, a teenager who had been with Rick for 5 years, stepped forward. When I first started training, I could barely look people in the eye, he said. Master Rick taught me that true strength isn't in your fists, it's in your heart. The muscular biker who had tried to grab Rick earlier cleared his throat. You know, boss, he said to his leader, maybe we could all start fresh. Instead of riding around looking for trouble, we could. He gestured at the children, the dojo students, the families gathered around. We could be part of something better. The fair's security guard, Pete, who had been standing back watching everything unfold, approached with purpose. Instead of the stern warning everyone expected, he pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. I run a youth mentoring program at the community center, he said, offering the card to the biker leader. We could always use more volunteers. Especially men who understand the importance of second chances. The biker leader stared at the card for a long moment before accepting it with slightly trembling fingers. I used to be good with kids, he said softly, almost to himself. Used to know how to build things up instead of tearing them down. Rick's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it, then looked up with a warm smile. That's from my old sensei in Singapore, he said. He always told me that the most powerful technique in martial arts isn't a punch or a kick, it's the ability to transform an enemy into a friend. The cotton candy vendor had been busy at her machine, and now she handed out fresh cones to everyone gathered around. The sweet, fluffy treat seemed to break down the last barriers between the different groups. Children offered bites to adults, bikers held cotton candy for kids struggling to manage the large portions, and conversations flowed naturally. You know what's crazy, the second biker said, pink sugar dusting his beard. An hour ago, we were trying to start trouble. Now we're eating cotton candy and talking about kids' martial arts classes. He shook his head, laughing at the absurdity of it all. The biker leader pulled out his phone, staring at it with a mix of hope and fear. His mother's number hasn't changed, he said quietly. I've had it all this time, just. He trailed off, the weight of missed opportunities heavy in his voice. Rick placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, he said. Sometimes that step is as simple as pressing call. The crowd held its breath, watching as the biker leader's thumb hovering over the phone screen. A small voice piped up from the group of students. Master Rick says fear is just excitement in disguise. The simple statement brought chuckles from the adults, but its truth resonated with everyone present. The biker leader looked around at the unlikely gathering, martial arts students, fair workers, families, his fellow bikers, all united in this moment of possibility. In the distance, the Ferris wheel continued its eternal rotation, a reminder that life, too, comes full circle. The biker leader's thumb trembled over the phone screen as carnival music played softly in the background. The moment felt suspended in time, like the pause at the top of a Ferris wheel ride before it begins its descent. Everyone around him seemed to be holding their breath, united in silent support. I can't, he whispered, lowering the phone. What if she hangs up? What if? His voice cracked. What if he doesn't remember me? The tough exterior had completely crumbled, revealing the vulnerable father beneath. Rick stepped forward, his presence calming like a steady anchor in rough seas. When I first came to America, he shared, I couldn't speak much English. My students would laugh at my pronunciation. But one day, a wise student told me something I never forgot, the only failure is not trying. The cotton candy vendor, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. 10 years ago, my daughter wouldn't talk to me either, she said, her hands automatically spinning another cone of pink fluff. Now she helps me run this stand every weekend. But that first call. She shook her head, remembering. Hardest thing I ever did. One of Rick's teenage students, who had been practicing his forms in the background, stopped and approached. Before I joined the dojo, I was so angry at my parents for divorcing that I wouldn't speak to my dad for a year, he said. Now we train together every Saturday. Sometimes the things we're most scared of turn out to be the best decisions we ever make. The second biker pulled out his wallet and retrieved a crumpled piece of paper. Been carrying this around for months, he admitted, showing it to his leader. It was a martial arts class schedule, with several beginners classes highlighted. Keep telling myself, next week I'll go watch my kid. But next week never comes, does it? The fair's lights seemed to glow brighter as night settled in fully, creating a warm cocoon around the gathered crowd. Children darted between adults, their laughter mixing with the distant carnival sounds. The atmosphere had transformed from one of confrontation to something almost sacred, a moment of collective healing. The muscular biker who had earlier tried to intimidate Rick now stood with his arms crossed, but his stance was protective rather than aggressive. "Remember when you taught me to rebuild my first engine?" he asked his leader. "You said the hardest part wasn't the mechanical stuff, it was believing I could do it." Rick's youngest student, a small girl with determined eyes, tugged at the biker leader's vest again. "When I'm scared before a tournament, Master Rick tells me to breathe in courage and breathe out fear," she demonstrated with exaggerated breaths, making several people smile. "Maybe you could try that?" The biker leader closed his eyes, following the child's advice. His massive chest rose and fell with deliberate breaths. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed in them, a spark of determination had replaced the fear. "The last time I saw him," he said quietly, "he was showing me this martial arts move he learned from TV. Kept practicing it over and over in our backyard." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. He was so proud when he finally got it right. The security guard, Pete, who had been maintaining a respectful distance, approached again. "You know," he said, "the community center where I volunteer? We've got this program where separated parents can meet their kids in a safe, supervised environment. Baby steps, you know." Rick nodded approvingly. "In martial arts, we don't expect beginners to do advanced moves right away. We start with the basics, build a foundation." He gestured to his students. "Every black belt in my dojo started with learning how to bow properly." The cotton candy vendor had been busy creating something special, a massive cotton candy sculpture that vaguely resembled a martial arts uniform. "Here," she said, handing it to the biker leader. "Maybe bring this when you see him. Kids can't resist cotton candy magic." The second biker suddenly straightened up. "Hey boss, what if we all went together? To the martial arts class, I mean." He looked around at his fellow bikers. "Strength in numbers, right? Like we always say." The crowd had grown larger as more fairgoers were drawn to the unusual gathering. Some had heard snippets of the story and passed it along, creating a ripple effect of empathy and support throughout the fairground. Parents held their children closer, couples squeezed hands, and teenagers put away their phones, captivated by the raw humanity of the moment. The biker leader looked down at his phone again, then at the photo of his son. The boy in the picture smiled back at him, frozen in time, holding that martial arts magazine with such pride. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere, the weight of possibilities overwhelming the burden of past mistakes. "Sometimes," Rick said softly, "the greatest victories aren't won in tournaments or competitions. They're won in moments like these, when we choose to fight for something more important than our pride." The fair's Ferris will cast rotating shadows over the scene, its lights creating a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to mirror the emotional transformation taking place. The evening had grown cool, but nobody seemed to notice or care. The biker leader took one final deep breath and pressed the call button before he could change his mind. The sound of ringing seemed to echo across the suddenly quiet fairground. Everyone watched, barely breathing, as he held the phone to his ear with a trembling hand. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3 rings. Each one felt like an eternity. The cotton candy vendor crossed her fingers. Rick's students instinctively assumed their meditation poses, as if sending their collective energy toward a positive outcome. The other bikers moved closer to their leader, offering silent support. Then, a click. A woman's voice answered, cautious but clear enough for those nearest to hear. "Hello? Marie?" The biker leader's voice cracked. It's me." He swallowed hard, years of regret evident in his tone. "I know I have no right to call, but..." He glanced at Rick, who nodded encouragingly. "I was wondering how our boy is doing." The silence that followed felt endless. The Ferris wheel completed an entire rotation. A child's balloon popped somewhere in the distance. Finally, Marie spoke again, her voice a mix of emotions. "He asked about you last week." The biker leader's knees nearly buckled. His companions steadied him as he pressed the phone closer to his ear. "He did? He saw a motorcycle group ride past his school," Marie continued, her voice softening slightly. "Said it reminded him of when you used to take him for rides in the backyard on your shoulders, pretending to be a motorcycle." Tears began flowing freely down the biker leader's face now, but he made no move to wipe them away. The tough exterior had completely dissolved, revealing the father who had been hiding underneath all along. "He's still into martial arts," Marie added, causing several of Rick's students to exchange excited glances. "Takes classes twice a week. Has a tournament coming up actually." "I know it's asking a lot," the biker leader said quickly, "but would it be okay if I came to watch? I won't interfere, I'll sit in the back. He won't even have to know I'm there if you don't want him to." The fairground seemed to hold its collective breath again. The cotton candy vendor's machine hummed softly in the background, and somewhere a carousel played its gentle melody. Rick's youngest students had unconsciously formed a circle, holding hands as if performing their focus exercise before class. Marie's voice came through again, measured but not unkind. "The tournament's next Saturday at the community center. He competes at 11. A pause. "He's gotten really good, you know. Won his last 2 matches. Just like his old man," the second biker whispered, nudging his leader with a gentle elbow. "Remember those boxing trophies in your garage?" The biker leader nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice again, it was steady despite his tears. "Marie, I know I messed up. I know I can't just walk back in like nothing happened. But I'm trying to change. Today, I met someone who helped me see things differently." He looked at Rick, who was watching the conversation unfold with quiet satisfaction. "There's this dojo, run by a world champion. He teaches kids more than just fighting, he teaches them about life, about being better people." He took another deep breath. "I'd like to learn those lessons too, if it's not too late." There was a thoughtful silence on the other end of the line. When Marie spoke again, her voice carried a note of cautious hope. "You know what your son said last week? He said he hopes wherever you are, you're still as strong as he remembers. But he also said he hopes you've learned to be gentle too." The security guard, Pete, stepped forward and handed the biker leader another business card. "The community center offers family counseling," he said quietly. "Many of our families start there before moving to supervised visits. Baby steps, remember?" The biker leader tucked the card into his vest pocket with his free hand, nodding gratefully. Around him, the fair had taken on an almost dreamlike quality. The light seemed softer, the sounds gentler, as if the universe itself was creating a space for this moment of reconciliation. "Would you?" The biker leader started, then gathered his courage. "Would you tell him something for me? Tell him his dad never stopped loving him. Tell him I'm sorry I forgot how to show it for a while. And tell him..." He looked around at the unlikely gathering of bikers, martial artists, families, and fairgoers who had become witnesses to his transformation. "Tell him I'm learning to be both strong and gentle." One of Rick's teenage students, who had been practicing his forms earlier, stepped forward. "Sir, He said respectfully to the biker leader, "When you come to the tournament, would you like me to show you some basic martial arts etiquette? So you can understand what your son is learning?" The other bikers immediately perked up at this suggestion. "Hey, maybe we could all learn," the muscular one said. "Make it a group thing. Support the boss and his kid." The cotton candy vendor, who had been quietly wiping tears with her apron, suddenly brightened. "I provide snacks for the tournament sometimes," she said. "I'll make sure to be there next Saturday." Nothing brings people together like cotton candy. Marie's voice came through the phone again, softer now. "I hear other people around you. Sounds like you're not alone." "No," the biker leader replied, looking at the extraordinary community that had formed around him in the past hour. "I'm not alone anymore. And I don't want our son to ever feel alone either." The conversation with Marie continued, each word helping to bridge the gap that years of absence had created. "You know," she said, her voice warming slightly, "he keeps that old photo of you two at the baseball field. The one where you're wearing your coach's cap." The biker leader touched his vest pocket where the same photo was stored. "I keep it too," he admitted. "Never could bring myself to take it out, even during my darkest days." He glanced at his fellow bikers, who were still providing silent support. "Guess I needed someone to remind me of who I used to be." Rick stepped forward, speaking quietly so only those closest could hear. "Sometimes we need to lose our way completely before we can find our true path." He gestured to his students, who were still watching with rapt attention. "Every person in my dojo has a story of transformation. Some are just beginning their journey, others are further along, but we're all walking the same path." The cotton candy vendor, who had been listening intently, suddenly exclaimed, "Oh! The tournament next Saturday, that's when I bring my special cherry-flavored cotton candy. The kids love it." She smiled warmly. "Your boy always asks for the blue raspberry though. Says it matches his martial arts uniform." This small detail, his son's preference for blue raspberry cotton candy, hit the biker leader like a physical force. Such a simple thing, yet it made his son feel more real, more present than he had in years. His voice shook as he spoke into the phone. "Marie, I know I have no right to ask this, but, could I bring him something next Saturday? Nothing big, just blue raspberry cotton candy?" Marie finished, a hint of amusement in her voice. "He'd like that." There was a pause, then she added more seriously, "Just, don't make promises you can't keep. He's had enough disappointment." The second biker suddenly spoke up, loud enough for Marie to hear through the phone. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll make sure he's there. The whole crew will get him there on time, properly dressed, and ready to be a father again." The fairground had grown quieter as evening deepened, but the space around them remained alive with energy. The Ferris wheel's lights reflected off the chrome of the bikers' motorcycles parked nearby, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Parents who had stayed to watch the scene unfold were explaining to their children in hushed voices about the power of second chances. "I've been taking some notes," Pete the security guard said, holding up a small notebook. "The tournament's at 11, but family counseling has morning sessions at 9. If you're interested, I could make a call, get you in to see someone before the tournament. Might help with the nerves." The biker leader nodded gratefully, then spoke into the phone again. "Marie? Would it be okay if I came a bit earlier? There's a counselor I'd like to talk to first. Want to do this right this time." The silence that followed was different from the earlier tense pauses. This one felt hopeful, like the moment before sunrise. When Marie finally responded, her voice carried a note of respect. That would be good. Really good." Rick's students had begun demonstrating basic martial arts moves to the other bikers, who watched with surprising interest. The muscular biker was attempting a basic bow, his leather jacket creaking with the movement. "Your boy's got a mean right kick," Marie continued, warming to the conversation. His instructor says he's never seen someone so determined to get every move perfect. Reminds me of someone else I used to know. The biker leader smiled through his tears. That baseball team I coached? Never had a kid give up. Taught them that perfection isn't about not making mistakes, it's about getting back up and trying again. He looked at Rick. Seems like I forgot that lesson myself for a while. One of Rick's older students, who had been practicing his kata nearby, paused and approached. Sir? We have a parent-child class tomorrow morning. Maybe you'd like to come watch? Get a feel for what your son's been learning? The other bikers immediately jumped on the idea. Yeah, boss. We could all go. Learn the ropes together. Their enthusiasm was infectious, spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. The cotton candy vendor began packing up her supplies, but not before preparing one last cone. Here, she said, handing it to the biker leader. Blue raspberry. Practice for next Saturday. The simple gesture carried the weight of promise and possibility. Marie, the biker leader said, his voice stronger now, I know this doesn't fix everything. I know I have years of mistakes to make up for. But I want you to know, I'm not just doing this on a whim. Today, I met people who showed me that it's never too late to change, never too late to learn, never too late to try to be the father our boy deserves. Through the phone came the sound of papers rustling, then Marie's voice, slightly muffled as if she were looking at something while speaking. I'm marking it in my calendar right now. Saturday, 11 o'clock. But. She paused meaningfully, if you're serious about that counseling session before the tournament, maybe I could come too? If you think that would help. The fairy lights strung above the fairground seemed to glow brighter at these words. Rick's youngest student spontaneously broke into the respectful bow they performed at the end of each class. The other bikers straightened their leather vests, as if preparing for an important ceremony. The biker leader's hand trembled as he held the phone. You'd do that? He asked Marie, his voice barely above a whisper. You'd come to counseling too? For our son, she replied softly. And maybe for all of us. The sound of a door opening came through the phone, followed by a young voice in the background asking who was calling. The biker leader's breath caught in his throat. Marie's voice became muffled, as if she'd covered the phone. After a moment, she returned. He's here. Would you like to say hello? Just a quick hello? The question hung in the air like a delicate soap bubble, full of both promise and fragility. The biker leader looked around at the extraordinary gathering of people who had become his unexpected support system. Rick nodded encouragingly, his students instinctively moved into their strength stance, and his fellow bikers stood tall beside him. The cotton candy vendor crossed her fingers, and Pete the security guard gave him a thumbs up. Yes, he managed to say, his voice stronger than he expected. Yes, please. There was a rustling sound, then a young boy's voice came through the phone. Hello? The single word carried the weight of 2 years of silence. Hey, champ, the biker leader said, tears flowing freely now. It's Dad. A pause, then, Dad? Really? The boy's voice was a mixture of surprise, uncertainty, and something else, hope, perhaps. Mom said you were away finding yourself. The biker leader looked at Rick, then at his fellow bikers, then at all the families gathered around. I was lost for a while, he admitted. But I think I finally found my way back. Are you? The boy hesitated, are you still strong like before? The question brought a fresh wave of tears, but the biker leader smiled through them. I'm learning to be strong in a different way now, buddy. A better way. He glanced at Rick's students demonstrating their forms. Actually, I hear you're the strong one now. Your mom tells me you're doing great in martial arts. The boy's voice brightened immediately. Yeah. I'm learning all these cool moves. My sensei says I have good discipline. Do you know what that means, Dad? It means I never give up. Just like in baseball, the biker leader said softly, remembering their backyard practice sessions. Remember what we used to say? It's not about not striking out, the boy recited, and everyone could hear the smile in his voice. It's about getting back up to bat. The cotton candy vendor quietly wiped tears from her eyes with her apron. Rick's youngest students were beaming, recognizing the familiar lesson about persistence. The other bikers stood straighter, as if the boy's words had touched something in them too. Mom says you might come to my tournament on Saturday, the boy said, his voice careful now, trying not to sound too hopeful. Is that true? The biker leader squared his shoulders, making eye contact with each person who had helped bring him to this moment. Yes, buddy. I'll be there. Front row. He paused, then added, actually, I'm going to start learning martial arts too. Got some pretty good teachers lined up. Really? The boy's excitement was contagious. Maybe someday we could practice together? Pete stepped forward, holding up his community center business card. We have family classes, he mouthed silently, nodding encouragingly. I'd like that very much, the biker leader said. But first, I need to learn about discipline too. About showing up. About keeping promises. Dad, the boy's voice was quieter now. I kept that picture of us. The baseball one. Sensei says it's good to have a goal to work towards. The fairground lights seemed to glow warmer, and the evening breeze carried the sweet scent of cotton candy. The scene had transformed from its tense beginnings into something beautiful, a moment of healing that touched everyone present. I kept it too, buddy, the biker leader said, patting his vest pocket. Never let it go. Just like I never really let you go, even when I was too messed up to show it. Marie came back on the phone briefly. We should wrap up for now, she said gently. But Saturday, we'll all be there. 9 o'clock, right? For the counseling? 9 o'clock, the biker leader confirmed. I'll be there. We'll do this right this time. After the call ended, the biker leader stood quietly for a moment, absorbing everything that had happened. His fellow bikers surrounded him, their support silent but strong. Rick's students, who had witnessed the entire transformation, bowed respectfully, not out of fear, but out of recognition for the courage it takes to change. The cotton candy vendor started packing up her stand for the night. I'll see you all at the tournament, she said with a warm smile. Blue raspberry cotton candy, front and center. Rick stepped forward one last time. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. My dojo. He handed the biker leader a business card. You and your friends are welcome to observe the parent-child class. The first step of any journey is simply showing up. The second biker checked his phone. Boss, I just signed up for my kid's next tournament too. Figure it's time we all learned how to be there for our children. Pete was making notes in his notebook. I'll be at the community center early on Saturday. Any of you need anything, just ask for Pete. We're all in this together now. As the group began to disperse, the fairground returning to its normal evening rhythm, the biker leader looked up at the star-filled sky. 2 years of darkness were ending, not with a bang or a fight, but with cotton candy, martial arts lessons, and the promise of blue raspberry treats at a children's tournament. The night air carried the distant sound of carousel music, mixing with the laughter of children and the gentle conversations of families heading home. The Ferris wheel made its final turns, its lights reflecting off chrome motorcycles and creating halos around the heads of Rick's students as they practiced their final forms of the evening. What had begun as a confrontation had transformed into a beginning, not just for one man and his son, but for an entire community that had come together to witness and support the power of change, the strength of vulnerability, and the simple truth that it's never too late to choose a better path.